You are tuned in to the FowlWeather podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
Welcome to another episode in the Young Waterfowl Professional Series. All of us in the profession of waterfowl and wetland science, conservation, and management came from somewhere. These are the stories of young, passionate conservationists that have made their passion for the ducks into a career. All right, folks, another great guest on the FowlWeather podcast Young Waterfowl Professionals series. Today we welcome Cory Highway. Cory is a Ph.D. student at Tennessee Tech University working under the guidance of Dr. Bradley Cohen. His research centers on the ecology of wintering mallards in western Tennessee with a particular focus on enhancing landscape connectivity for wintering waterfowl. Whew, that's a lot, man. You're good, Folks do write their own bios. I don't know everybody that's on here. So Cory's a dedicated outdoorsman, passionate about conducting applied research that supports effective wetland and waterfowl conservation efforts. Cory, welcome to the FowlWeather podcast Young Waterfowl Professional series today.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and we chatted a little bit before, and we always get into like what led you to this career path thing. But I was out in the garden yesterday listening to my series of music that I have set up, and the whitetail, buck deer, chubby little groundhog song came on, Dixieland Delight, that makes reference to Tennessee. And I wanted to ask you if you were an original Tennessee boy, or you heard the chubby little groundhog song and then decided to move to Tennessee, or kind of none of the above.
Man, Tennessee's always held kind of a special place in my heart. I've enjoyed coming and visiting Tennessee when I've gotten the opportunity, but I'm a Michigan boy through and through, born and raised there. And just kind of, as we've talked about in several of these podcasts, your life, just activities that happenstance, it leads you down the path to, now I'm in Tennessee and have been for the past 6 years and enjoy the heck out of it. It's a great place to do research and to be an outdoorsman and just live, honestly. So still love Michigan and still love all the folks back up north, but getting time down here in the South and kind of understanding a different landscape has been extremely valuable to me, and I've really loved it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's always how I felt moving, north to south too, is that it's just such a welcoming environment, and it gives you that perspective, especially for the birds you work with, right? So you've worked on some local scale stuff though. Like, let's jump right into some of so you did a master's there.
Yeah.
On a lot of the WMAs and national wildlife refuges, looking at mallard movement.
Yep.
And give us a little bit of that background and how, because a lot of folks don't stay at the same university, right? They go somewhere else for their PhD, but you decided to stay there. So I'm guessing your work builds off that prior research. So kind of in a nutshell, like, what you've been working on there in West Tennessee and what you learned and what you expect to learn with the next step.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to come on as a master's student in 2019, and I was brought on with two really amazing PhD students, Nick Masto and Abby Blake Bradshaw. Mm-hmm. Nick is now working for Fish and Wildlife Service up in Bismarck, and Abby's at Forbes Biological Station. So still very active waterfowl professionals, and coming onto the project with three students and a really a large goal of just trying to understand what's going on in West Tennessee allowed us to ask a lot of questions, specifically in regards to mallards, but really in terms of the entire landscape and trying to apply what we were seeing in West Tennessee to the Mississippi Valley as a whole. And so for me specifically on the project as a master's student, I was looking at depletion of one of the most popular food sources on the landscape, which is corn, and movements of mallards in relation to habitat availability and hunting pressure specifically, and kind of when they're deciding to move and how they're moving on the landscape. So it was one of the big things when we got here. We really wanted to try to understand the food dynamics in West Tennessee. There's been a lot of talk, and Ryan Askren, Dr. Askren, he brought it up in a podcast of yours a couple episodes ago, the lack of food and the diminish of rice stocks and traditional food sources for waterfowl and the MAV. We wanted to understand, does West Tennessee mirror that, or are there some differences? And really what we found is that there's a lot of artificially enhanced food sources in West Tennessee through the planting of corn primarily. And that's, specifically on private lands. Our public landowners or, managers they're planting corn on sanctuaries, they're planting corn on public hunted areas. But outside of that, which hasn't really been incorporated into energetic models as well, is just the amount of private land biomass that's out there, and really it's growing and growing every year. We're seeing more and more private landowners kind of jumping on that bandwagon. And so we really kind of wanted to understand, what did that mean in terms of just food availability and how it changed over winter. And so we went in there and every 2 weeks would sample and look at that biomass and how it changed, and kind of get a gauge on how the birds were using that food source. Which was really important for my research as master's students, but that also played into Abby and Nick's analyses. Nick looking at landscape scale energetics across all of the food sources, and how our birds are reacting and just kind of selecting habitat, reacting to hunting pressure in West Tennessee and the Mississippi Valley as a whole. And then Abby Blake Bradshaw was really diving into how our birds were using sanctuary, how they were responding to food and disturbance on sanctuary, and really what sanctuary meant to our mallards in the winter. So it was really cool to kind of put all those pieces together and understand why birds were doing what they were doing, when they were moving, and where they were going, that sort of stuff. And so, one of the big things that Abby actually undertook in her PhD was disturbing these sanctuary areas, artificially disturbing these areas, trying to get birds kind of to move a little bit more and spread out into areas that they traditionally weren't using. Maybe not, I shouldn't have said try to do that, but to understand how much these sanctuaries can receive disturbance and kind of function the same way they are traditionally functioning, or when does that switch kind of flip, where they start moving off sanctuary and using other habitat, that sort of stuff. And really one of the big things she found was that our birds, despite, these short bursts of disturbance on our refuges, were really still hunkering down on these refuges and using them as a home base. They were kind of scared straight, if you will. They would just hunker down harder for days post disturbance. And if you have Abby on the podcast, I'm sure she'll jump into it a lot more. But for us trying to disperse birds across the landscape, disturbance didn't really do that. We see that our birds are still very much so locked on to our refuge areas, our sanctuaries, and as central foragers, they were moving from these refuges and using landscape resources, but in very close proximity. And that left big gaps in our habitat that were relatively unused. The birds would still use them. Hunters, 10 miles from a refuge are still going to shoot ducks, but they're not getting the opportunities that people right tight to a refuge would be. And their resources aren't being used as much as the folks who have cornfields right tight to a refuge. So my PhD and really what we're trying to do here is connect the landscape a little bit more through the use of our smaller stepping stone rest areas. And so we're taking private land and we're taking areas that were kind of lower quality hunting areas or not flooded at all in previous years. And we're making stepping stone, 80 to 300 acre rest areas in between our state and federal refuges. And really just trying to kind of disperse birds a little bit more, try to kind of get a little bit more ubiquitous use of our resources on the landscape, and really spread birds out in an attempt to increase hunting opportunities throughout the landscape. And, there's been some other projects of mini refuges, down in Louisiana in the 80s and 90s, so we are kind of taking a different approach in a more channelized landscape, a more linear landscape. Those landscapes like Louisiana and the larger Mississippi Alluvial Valley, it's vast, it's flat, there's kind of water everywhere. And for us in West Tennessee, we've got this sliver of the Mississippi Valley, but we also have these river corridors that provide very linear habitat. And so we can kind of make those stepping stones where birds can traverse up our river systems and kind of get into areas that they weren't before as much. And so that's what our focus is. We just finished up our third field season of capture of waterfowl, putting transmitters out, but we're also using recording units, our acoustic recording units to listen to gunshot blasts as a proxy for hunter opportunity, and then using drone surveys to try to do a little bit of waterfowl surveys on our rest areas that doesn't require us to go in and disturb these smaller rest areas. So that's the big spiel. That's the big pitch of what the past 6 years have been, and now for the next year and a half, I'm just sitting behind a computer trying to put it all together and make it make sense. So it's the fun stuff, right?
It is, though. Honestly, I always like to see the analysis kind of come together, right? Like we're working on a Canada goose project with stable isotopes, morphological measurements, and maybe some genetic stuff to maybe differentiate among the kind of resident. They're not really residents. They're technically temperate nesting geese because they still do move, but the giant Canada geese that kind of the golf course geese, right?
Yeah.
And North Atlantic population where they mix. So trying to figure out if we can find a way to differentiate them better than we have in the past, and maybe even for the parts collection survey. And so we're just sitting in the lab taking all these measurements, and I'm like, man, can't wait till all this data comes back, honestly, because it's like you can't quite see it all. You can kind of get a feel for it.
Yep.
But until you run it, you don't know, what it's going to tell you. And especially your stuff at that, with spatial data and all that. Like I've looked at, you kind of can get a feel for what the birds are doing, but unless it's like a slam dunk, a lot of these things are nuanced where there's subtle differences that the analysis picks up that you might not have been able to see. And that's like, some of that's like the difference between, we get into like hunter perception versus reality too. Like you're working with birds across a whole entire landscape and monitoring their movements and such. Whereas, somebody that hunts a single lease or, a couple WMAs or national forests and stuff has a relatively smaller perspective. And I kind of get the feeling like sometimes when we collect data versus when we look at it, that's like perception versus reality sometimes too out there.
Yeah. I think that's a huge thing and something that we deal with a lot. And looking at, we've collected data now for 6 years, and for the past 3 years, we're like, we're starting to see trends and we're starting to try to understand what's going on, but without having run these analyses, we can't say anything for sure. Mm-hmm. And really the hunter perception is huge. And that's something that I think we're going to try to tap into as well, and maybe do some surveys because, that the hunter opportunity and perception oftentimes differ quite a bit based on where you are and just, even the river tributary systems in West Tennessee, we've heard differing opinions from guys that are only 20 miles apart. They're like, we had the best duck season we've ever had. And then a guy just on another river system says, we haven't seen a bird in 2 months. So, it's really interesting to kind of compare those perceptions. And I think it's extremely valuable too, kind of bringing in that human dimensions into waterfowl management and research. I don't think you can do it without it. And I know you've published several papers on the human dimensions and hunter perception. I think that's a really big aspect, especially going forward in trying to, continue to recruit hunters and improve this space for everybody. We're managing people as much as we're managing waterfowl.
Well, and yeah, that's an awesome point. And, you're wise ahead of your time, I think, because, it's something I realized and why the FowlWeather podcast ended up doing the data stream series that we're doing the off weeks from this was to try to get the good information to people out there about, how we collect data and maybe what's really happening. Because we get a lot of, especially in the social media age, a lot of comment that comes from perception. And I take all that in and say, you're not wrong. Nothing you're saying is wrong for where you're at and what you're doing, but it doesn't mean it happens everywhere that way. This turkey season in New York is a perfect example. You either had turkeys or you didn't.
Yeah.
Like there was no tweener stuff where like, yeah, man, if I work for a turkey, I'll kill a turkey. It was like if you went to this is why I just traveled all over and did run and gun just trying to find birds, right? Because once you got on them, there was a ton of them. They were
Yeah.
just in like concentrated spots. But if you were just in one of these dead zones this year, you would have thought turkeys were extinct in New
Yeah.
York, you know? Um, so a lot of variation there on the landscape from what people see. So really cool work, Cory. And I think you're kind of on the back end of or building on some of Nick Masto's stuff too, as you said, with the connectivity. So there was a like, is this part of that idea of a state program of like payment for leaving some fallow areas? So there's actually sanctuary between like large national wildlife refuges and stuff. Is this part of
Yep.
that thought
Yeah.
process y'all
So
had?
if you read the proximity paper that Masto published, about a year or so ago, this is directly picking up on the management implications in the last paragraph of, perhaps we could improve landscape connectivity through the addition of these smaller, we're calling them leased wetlands. And there's similar programs going on, like the rice program over in Arkansas, but those areas are actually being hunted. And so it's kind of been one of those things that the perception is important too, because we are leasing some of these areas to rest that could be hunted, but we're doing it to try to improve hunting. and
Yep.
and I think a lot of people have latched on to the idea that you do need some rest nearby. These larger hunt clubs are, all of them now have their own sanctuary areas, or
Hmm.
they're right tight to a refuge themselves. And so a lot of private landowners that have an 80-acre parcel or a 100-acre parcel, they really can't afford to rest a chunk of their property and still hunt their property. They just don't have enough ground to do it. And so reaching out to some of these larger landowners that do have the space to do it, and will possibly improve hunting in the area, could be constructive. There's no absolutes. I don't want to say that it is or isn't working now,
Hmm.
because we haven't gotten the analysis out yet, but
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
it seems promising. And so there's going to be, hopefully, if everything works, and it seems that the data shows that it's a valuable tool, these could be either opportunities that states could pick up and do their own kind of leasing program, or this is a co-op thing where 3 or 4 landowners say, hey, let's set out 20 acres of our border property and just don't hunt that area, and hold 100 birds, 200 birds
Hmm.
that could provide a little bit of a source for those slower days, those non-migration days,
Hmm.
and during the hunting season. So that's kind of like the end goal, if everything works out. If it doesn't work out and we see there's no difference, then it's that's just as cool to say, hey, it's more of a food thing, or it's more of a large, you need big rest areas, you need big sanctuaries. So
Hmm.
there's always cool information that'll come out of it. But yeah, that's kind of the end goal, is to understand, can these kind of smaller rest areas actually improve the hunting on the landscape through connectivity.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. And I think this kind of begs the question of, or leads down the path of, a lot of folks are like, man, can we just hunt the refuges? Like, ducks are all on them, and that's like where we need opportunity. But I think I'd like to hear your comment on that. I'm a staunch, refuge person, just from spending time in Missouri and talking with those folks. And, as you increased refuge up to 50% near a hunted area, your bird per hunter average increased up till about 50%, and then it flatlined. So to me, sanctuaries matter. These ducks have a lot of pressure. We talk about pressure a lot these days.
Mhm.
And so they do need a place to get away and feed and pair bond and do all those things that make ducks ducks, and make ducks be able to produce more ducks,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
also a goal. So
Yeah.
from all your just and feel free to wing it beyond the results too, like go into the feeling portion of it, or just use
Yeah.
solid science results.
Yeah.
But
No.
your sense of sanctuaries and their utility on the landscape for duck conservation, but also duck hunting at the same time. I think you kind of hit on it in a I wouldn't even say roundabout way, but like a direct hit on the utility
Yeah.
of them for the bird conservation as well as for duck hunting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very clear that they're necessary. That was even in the first 3 years with Nick and Abby's research too, diving into refuge areas and sanctuary use. they're absolutely essential for all of the things that you mentioned before. That's, if we're looking just at hunter opportunity, they're essential for having a population of birds in the area. It's very clear that if we don't have something to hold birds, they're probably going to find an area that is unhunted. And if it's not the state or feds who are managing these wetlands, eventually a private landowner is going to understand the value and create their own sanctuary, and they're going to hold the birds. And so I think that is something that we need to have on the landscape, and we need to have areas that are well managed and provide more than just a high energy food source. There's that seems to be the go-to for what people see as quality habitat, especially private land managers. And the thing that our public land managers are doing very well are actually really good quality moist soil habitat, flooded bottomland hardwoods, these regenerative oak planting, stuff like that private landowners, they may not have the resources, they may not have the time or the knowledge to really implement those really quality management objectives. And so I think that is far and away one of the most important things that we keep consistent, is having these sanctuary areas for waterfowl to complete their annual cycle, to like you said, to make those pair bonds, to find those invertebrates in the moist soil and the flooded bottomland hardwoods, to get the carbohydrate, energy dense corn, to get those moist soil seeds. I think that we really need to keep a focus on that. And and there is a tipping point, right? There still needs to be that hunter opportunity. We still need to use our public lands to create that hunter opportunity, and really kind of find that balance between opportunity and abundant opportunity or quality. So we have, in Tennessee, we've got these draw units that provide quality hunts, but they're not going to provide as much opportunity for a lot of people, because you can't pack as many people into these quota areas and stuff like that. And I think that's important too, is kind of having this gradient of opportunity to quality, and allowing people to experience the really awesome waterfowl opportunities that we have in the Mississippi Valley and in West Tennessee and everywhere else. So, I've kind of rambled now, but I really do want to harp on the how much importance we've seen in these sanctuary areas in our research and our science, and just in our anecdotes of going out there and hunting these areas. You always want to be the one hunting next to a sanctuary area. And as soon as you strip that, it's not going to be valuable anymore. And we dove into that with the disturbance stuff. It's as soon as you go out there and start messing with these refuge areas, they're not going to function the same as they were before. So there needs to be some of that, spatial sanctuary that you really just you leave alone, and those birds can kind of find that respite from the pressure. Because even though we're losing hunter numbers, it seems like the intensity of hunting,
people go more.
Oh yeah,
people go more. Well, and if you followed the FowlWeather podcast at all, one of my comments is just quit going every day. Pick the best days to go and have better hunts, and give your birds a break. If your birds are stale, stay home. And there's not a lot of, you guys kind of know this too from watching your telemetry units. There aren't a ton of flight days per year.
No,
but man, they're good. They are fantastic.
There's magic days, and that was the second chapter of my master's stuff, was trying to get at, when were those flight days? What were the conditions that gave us one more flight per day? And it's those storm days. It's when the barometric pressure is dropping. It's some of that traditional ideas of our birds are kind of getting pushed around the landscape a little bit more when there's more water on the landscape, stuff like that. So but yeah, not hunting every day just because you can, I think, is really important. And I think it makes the flight days so much more impactful and memorable in people's minds. And you don't get burnt out as much. And I think some people have really quality hunting seasons that they don't really understand were quality, because they forget about those 5 really awesome flight days, and they remember those 55. We picked 2-3 off, and it kind of, I think it sours some people on the experience, where it's like, man, if you toned it down a little bit and just hunted when the conditions were looking right, you may have actually realized you had a banging hunting season.
And I'm probably going 50% of what I used to and shooting twice as many ducks.
Yeah.
right? Per unit time, easily. I mean, I was averaging 4 birds per hunt last year,
That's awesome.
right? Yeah. Well, I also barely went because I work too much, and this dang podcast has me too busy with
Your
all the
total
other
doesn't look
things.
great.
But
Your bird per hunt looks awesome.
it was great. It was absolutely great. And I started doing that a few years ago. This year I really hit it hard on the algorithm thing and just went during those times and did well. There's also there's reshuffle days too when you get, especially for y'all, you get like massive rain events and things like that where birds know there's new resources. The barometric pressure drops. They follow precipitation lines, and you get this reshuffling of birds, and they end up in new places they haven't been before. The landscape looks different. I think when they get in the air, the water footprint looks different. I think they get confused some too as to where they're at, and it increases shooting opportunities. So there's like that local thing that happens, and then there's like the big weather system thing that happens. I mostly work on the big weather system thing. Yeah. And then I talk about the river flooding and other stuff that's going to help folks out as time goes on. You hit on one really good point, and we're going to get into all the actual questions that we usually do on the Young Waterfowl Professional Series, but you're pretty put together and you got good information. So I want to kind of make a comment or chat about one is that Northwest Ohio, this is from work with Winus Point Marsh Conservancy and others. The folks around them got into kind of like a corn arms race, like a high carb arms race. And the ducks sit in the middle of Sandusky Bay, and then they fly into the stuff at night and feed, and then they go back and sit. And where Winus Point does really well is they do a lot of emergent marsh and moist soil stuff, and those ducks during the day like pick up and they go look for that extra nutrition, because you can feed a mallard corn 100% of the time, and you know what it does? It dies.
Yeah,
it dies because you can't live on candy bars alone. No. So those ducks are also looking for other things, and Winus Point has mixed it up and are pulling a lot of birds and a diversity of species other than mallards too, out of those areas. And so my concern, I hear you talk about all these folks want to just go with high carb stuff, is you can get into an arms race where like I need more corn than the guy next to me so that I have more birds. And the reality is that, yeah, you can shoot birds over corn. Like I always tell students, I'm like, if I had a 400 acre 4-unit, impounded system, all squares, right? One big square and then 4 different squares inside it, I would rotate 100 acres of corn across those. I'm not an idiot. I know that it works to kill ducks, but it's not all that I'm going to do, right? And I'm probably going to run moist soil on those other ones, or if there was a way to work an emergent marsh in for more permanent water, so early season ducks have something to land on, I would work that in. But is that your sense in Tennessee sometimes where folks get in this mental mindset that it's corn or nothing?
Yep. Oh, 100%. And I think that may be changing a little bit. Perception may be changing a little bit. And again, we're getting into perceptions and feelings, but that's fair. Some of the stuff that we've really seen, especially in like our sanctuaries, is that our birds at the rate that it's planted or managed rather, moist soil is selected for. And it's not to say that corn isn't, because corn definitely is. But when you have so much of one resource on the landscape, these pockets of diversity, even if they are less sought after, just black and white, they're still going to be sought after more than, the mass of corn that's out there. Mm-hmm. And that also leads us to, like, if every single person is planting corn, what's to say your corn is better than your neighbor's? You need to do everything right. Your corn needs to be flooded at the water. It needs to be close to where they're coming from, and it needs to be, quality, versus these other guys, there may be somebody that's just a mile further from the refuge and their corn is sticking up out of the water just an extra couple inches where it's just a little bit harder for that bird to get to. That's not going to be nearly as selected for as the person who has their water right to the ear, and the birds can easily get to it. They don't have to travel as far. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where I've leaned into, unless you can do it perfect, diversify, do something different, dirty corn or moist soil, do something that is different than your neighbor, because unless you're going to beat your neighbor, you got to try something a little bit different. And I think beating your neighbor is kind of it's hard. It's a term that has come up a lot. And I keep hearing people talk about my ducks, their ducks kind of thing. And really it's hard to just get people to understand, like, we're sharing this resource. There's a ton of ducks out there. let's work together and try to rotate some birds. And again, that's really where we're kind of harping on this co-op idea and stuff, and providing something that's different, not just to be better, but to provide, a deeper diversity for our resource, and kind
For
of
sure.
spreading birds out that way. So
For sure.
yeah, I mean, it's very corn heavy in our neck of the woods, but I hear rumblings that people are wanting to try something different and
Well,
do something different.
and so you used the term dirty corn, which I think is just a ploy to get people to do moist soil
Yeah,
and
it is.
still think there's corn, because I'm like, why would you have your corn? I mean, like, I grow food plots, right? I know to spray glyphosate at the right time to make sure my beans jump. I know I have to get in there and spray my corn food plots for my deer and stuff, because I don't want that weed competition with my plants that are going to produce those resources, the leaves and the beans for the soybeans and the corn later. I want that production from those plants. And then if you think about it, do you really want all that shade from corn to shade out your moist soil stuff? Just put them next to each other in swimming
Yep.
space.
Yeah.
Like put
Yep.
them in large enough blocks that the corn's growing like corn and the weeds are growing like weeds.
Yep.
And don't have them compete with each other. But it's a great gateway drug to get people to do moist soil, I think.
I think it is. And that's, Dr. Cohen, Brad, and I have talked a lot about what dirty corn means. And we completely agree. It's a gateway drug to get into moist soil and just creating a diversity. Because like you said, you're going to do, half good corn and half moist soil. Just split them apart and do it right,
Yeah.
And
I
so
mean, the ducks can swim, 50 yards to get
Yep.
from one to the other, right? Just put them in strips. If you got a, I don't know, 20-acre field, do 10 of one and 10 of the other,
Yep,
and then
exactly.
rotate them. And then, and here's the deal. You got a clean slate. You don't have to do anything. If
Yeah.
you grew production corn on that 10 acres, just walk away from it. The next
yeah.
year it's going to grow weeds, right? And then take your weedy area, till it, and plant your corn, and you're actually putting nutrients
Biomass.
from
Yep.
all of that biomass back into the ground for the corn. You're probably gonna have to fertilize that space a little bit at some point, right? But
Yeah.
anyhow,
But
wow,
I mean, I
are we-
agree that some of the best moist soil stands I've seen have been post cornfields, because there's
Amazing.
a buildup
Yeah.
of nitrogen in there that the corn just hadn't tapped. And
Yep.
in the barnyard grass, the grasses, they just explode. And it looks like you planted a Japanese millet field, and you didn't have to do a thing to it,
Yep.
so.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Hey, so as I said, I feel like you're pretty put together, but this doesn't happen by chance. You had mentors, you had a background. Let's start with like family stuff. Did you start with ducks? Did you start with deer hunting? Did you start with squirrel hunting?
Yeah.
I don't know, catching frogs. What was it?
Man, we did a little bit of everything. I came by it very organically. I had hunting and fishing on both sides of the family. My grandparents took me out, my mom, my dad, my aunts, my uncles. I was always out either camping or hunting or fishing. And we did a little bit of everything. My dad had, some bird dogs growing up. So we would chase the few remaining pheasants in Michigan around some of the fallow fields. And we'd always deer hunt. He would drag me into the marsh duck hunting. We just kind of did a little bit of everything, which was a great experience for me to try to dabble as a kid in all of the opportunities. And man, getting into this field, I've realized that a lot of people are not nearly as fortunate as I am in getting those opportunities and learning how to hunt from so many great mentors. And so, I mean, through, this is getting ahead of myself, but man, through hunting and hiring technicians on our projects and stuff, I try to get people out hunting as much as physically possible, especially if they haven't had the opportunity. And the number of first ducks we've shot in the past 6 years with our technicians and friends has been awesome. So I was very lucky with that. And one of the big things growing up was I always kept asking my dad, like, why are they doing this? Why are the deer doing this? Why are the ducks doing it? Why aren't they doing this? Where are they going? And it was just one of those infectious curiosities that made me realize I really wanted to know more about wildlife and that sort of stuff. And so, I mean, looking for colleges and leaving high school, I knew exactly I wanted to go into wildlife biology. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted it to be wildlife biology and work with some sort of conservation management. And I was lucky, in my, I think, sophomore year of college, I got onto an undergrad research project with Dr. Paul Keelan's out of Grand Valley State University. That's my undergrad. And we actually did American marten research in northern Michigan. And that was the most cool thing. It got me hooked on research. We literally got to go trap American marten, which, if you haven't seen them, they're a weasel cat that lives in a tree and catches badass food, and they're just the coolest little predator in the woods. And we don't have many of them in Michigan. They were extirpated, they're brought back, and so I was trying to understand what females were feeding their kits. And so I got to go and track females and then collect a bunch of scat from around the tree, wash the scat, and then see what they were eating. And that really, really hooked me on research. And so I give him a lot of kudos for just bringing on a green undergrad for that. And then the next 3 summers, I worked for the Michigan DNR and like a wildlife assistant role. And the managers that I was able to work under really instilled that kind of passion for on the ground management, and so I could kind of blend that research passion that I had received with actually doing the management. And I got to do some bear trapping and some food plot planning and that sort of stuff, and habitat management, and kind of got into duck banding a little bit in those positions. But really, my 3rd summer with the Michigan DNR, working for Don Avers, he's leading the duck banding team for Michigan. He taught me how to catch ducks and really catch ducks, and how to do it right, and really what it meant to get after this whole duck research and duck capture aspect. And I think that's what got me hired on to the position in my master's. I had a lot of this kind of research experience in the background, and I wanted to do something with movement ecology. And so when Dr. Cohen posted the master's position, I saw GPS telemetry and ducks. I was like, hey, I like ducks. I didn't think that's what I was going to work with necessarily, but I like ducks, and I really like movement ecology. And I was able to talk with him, and he brought me down to Tennessee. So I really loved being down here and working for him. Brad really, if my undergrad advisor, Paul Keenlitz, gave me a passion for research, Brad is who gave me a passion for quality and really good research, and doing things with a purpose, and really understanding the larger ecological questions that we're trying to ask, and see the bigger picture. So that was, I give him a lot of kudos for that. And it's a big reason I've stuck around with him for 6 years, is the passion this man has is crazy.
Now, too, that your capacity to duck band and understanding of duck banding kind of got you your position now. And I think that's something that any young folks, undergrad, high school kids that are listening, that are interested in the field, need to know, is that, like, in our major, our wildlife science major at ESF, we require a field experience, mostly because some kids just won't go do it, right? Yep. And we want all our graduates to have something leaving. But that's if there's one thing, that is it. It is, go get that hands-on experience. I don't always, like you said, you mentor some folks as far as hunting. I tend to take kids on that are hunters just because they have the natural history knowledge of the animals already, and the passion for continuing with them. But I mean, I'll bring other folks on, but boy, you better be able to do something, right? Yeah. Before you get there. Like, if you haven't done anything, it's not helpful. No. I mean, honestly, if I can find a kid that's trapped ducks, driven a tractor, runs a chainsaw, has some knowledge of statistical programs, and has a 3.0, I mean, I don't always look for 4.0 students. Yeah. Because you have to have that skill set to do that good work. Because if you didn't catch ducks, then it's all for naught, right? Right. And I've done it all, and I'm not going to be out there with you every day. Like, I don't have that time when I'm advising, 10 plus people. It's just not possible. So I think that's a comment to the young kids out there is get after it and go have that fun, do the hands-on stuff, get out of your books for sure. Yeah.
I completely agree. And that's one of the big things, like everybody who's trying to get into this field now, you all have a bachelor's degree from a reputable university with the baseline knowledge. That's not what's going to set you apart in applying for positions. You better have in your undergrad done a whole bunch of modeling and really understand stats, or you need to have that that field experience. And I just happen to have the field experience. And to Brad's, the big thing he said, he's like, I'm going to be with you in the office. I can teach anybody how to run a model. I can teach anybody stats, but to your point, I'm not going to be with you every day in the field. I need somebody who I can say, you're going to go do this. And they run a good field project. And so getting those experiences, I think is insanely valuable and something that I don't see nearly as much emphasis as needed in a lot of these undergrad universities to go out and not just, serve ice cream in the summers, or do something like that. Like, get away from your hometown and go get cool experiences and learn a new skill, make new connections. Otherwise, you're just not going to be as applicable and as hireable
and competitive, in general. So that's a life lesson right there, right? But what other life lessons that could you give to folks looking kind of to move forward in the wildlife field? And you want to do your PhD, you could have stopped with your master's and went and had a great career as a state biologist with some DNR or something. But what's you got another life lesson for folks out there?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, kind of bouncing off the go and get experience, go and get new connections is just go and make new friends. The amount of people and connections that I've been able to make and random friends that you don't realize will end up helping you in your career somewhere down the line. There's almost no bridge worth burning. I say almost. I wanted to caveat it because sometimes there is. But almost no.
Well, if you burn it, if you burn them, you better repair them later because it's a small world out there.
Oh my gosh! In coming from the deer world to the carnivore world to the duck world, in every world and usually across worlds, people know each other. Right. And everybody knows everybody, especially I found the waterfowl world because it's a migratory species and we're all so connected across the flyways, up and down the flyways. You're seeing people from different areas every single year, whether it's at a flyway committee meeting or it's at ducks and, every 3-4 years for a ducks conference. You're always going to be seeing people, and that's outside of just publishing and collaborating with people. So making friendships, keeping those friendships, facilitating those friendships, reaching out and kind of keeping them fresh every once in a while is so important, I think. And really there's no good reason most of the time to burn a bridge and make somebody not a friend.
And that's a lot of homework, honestly. Like, the amount of time as I get further up in my career and I'm an administrator and a fundraiser, the amount of time I spend on 1-hour phone calls with colleagues across North America, into Canada as well, is astonishing. Like, if I kept track of the numbers of hours I just did that type of activity and people cold calling me and me cold calling them, it's substantial, right? And that's like that continuing to keep those relationships. And if it's been a year since you've talked to somebody for whatever reason, call them. Most of the time I just get in so many damn different types of projects that I end up having to reach back out to the same people in a different part of the world,
Yep.
The Canada Goose Project I talked about is one of them. I mean, I got a guy who works for Canadian Wildlife Service that I worked with before who's in a position to potentially help with samples from Canada. So I talked to that person. But having those connections, that is super important. So, and here's the deal. Like, I grew up an introvert.
Yeah.
I'm not, like, I was the most scared kid on the planet. I didn't do anything. I didn't even, like, I got my driver's license like 2 years after I could possibly do it. Like, I matured late and I was just like in a shell. Right. Yeah. And so, like, I think to the audience, if like you're one of those kids and you're not outgoing, but so you'll latch on to the outdoors because it's like a safe space for you, maybe. I don't know. That's kind of maybe what it was for me, right? Like, I went out, I got off the school bus and picked up my shotgun and hiked into the woods to go shoot squirrels.
Yeah.
And that was my world. And so I was like pretty socially inept for a very long time. But if you're that person, it doesn't mean you can't grow.
Right.
As well and build those friend networks and such, right? And so that's a great lesson, I think, is to, be, I'm like, what am I? I'm extrovert, introvert. Like when I go to a party, I do like Irish goodbyes all the time.
Oh yeah, just
Because
sound
like
off.
I can only do like if I had to do more than an hour podcast, I'd probably lose it on you because I can only talk to somebody for so long.
Yeah, I
Um,
run out of stuff.
well, it's like okay, I'm good now, and my wife's exactly the same. And we'll be at a party with friends, and I'll like look at her, and she's like, "Yep," and we'll just nod heads and like walk out the door. Like I love the interaction with people, but I also need that me space and that introvert part as well. So
Yep.
we all come from a little bit different background. I don't like when you go into the waterfall world. There's not a ton of like full blown extroverts. I think they go on to different careers for the most
Yeah,
part.
yeah. Well, the extroverts know how to make money doing something better, I guess. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, for sure, for sure.
Um,
Hey, so if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
And it'd have to be, this is funny. I was thinking about this. It'd have to be something outdoors, and that was something that
Ah,
really hooked me
cool.
at. I knew I wanted to do something outdoors, and I landscaped for a little bit and thought about landscape architecture, that sort of stuff. But it's funny now because doing my PhD, I've really come to the realization, especially as my last field season when I was ending, I'm like, I am now going to sit behind a desk for the rest of my life, but I'm doing it because I'm really passionate about what I'm sitting behind the desk for. And so
Hmm.
if I wasn't here, I'd really want to do something still with environmental protections or consulting or something along those lines or native landscaping in some sort of fashion. I'm just very, very tied to the outdoors. And I think that's kind of something that I'll never lose, even though I am going to be behind the desk. I hope to find a career path going forward that I can make excuses to go out into the field, even if it's not my main position.
Yeah.
So,
So what is that though? What is the career path then? Or is it a professor? Is it an ecologist for, oh my goodness, I shouldn't say this, USGS or
yeah, I know.
whatever continues to exist out there in the world, and I am not going to touch politics
Yeah,
here, but
yeah,
it's got to wear on your mind a little bit with the there is a reduction in potential
yep.
jobs and more competition. So, but where do you see yourself after the PhD?
Yeah. I mean, that wears on my mind a lot because my goal, especially maturing into this PhD position, was to end up with USGS or Fish and Wildlife Service as an ecologist or a scientist. My passion, I think, in waterfowl is really connecting management to science and human dimensions, and really kind of making that full triangle. There's some people that really enjoy focusing on each node of the triangle, each corner, and I really like the holistic approach of bringing it all together and trying to make management based on human perception, human dimensions, and what the science is telling us. And so I really want to get into a position where I can kind of bring all those together, whether that's with Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, if we still have them, or with a nonprofit like Ducks Unlimited, or Delta, or a state agency, a research consultant, or maybe a waterfowl coordinator for a state, something where I can take the science and mesh it with the management and make kind of a landscape difference in what we're seeing for waterfowl and hopefully improve hunting along the way. So that's
Yeah.
that's my passion. That's where I really want to end up eventually.
So I didn't hear academia in there. Is it you went from you go from your undergrad to your master's and that doesn't feel horrible. It's a little bit of an upward swing, and then you go from your master's to your PhD. And maybe it's different from for where you're at, but my PhD was like a whole different beast, and it really taught me how to, I guess, run my own world,
Yeah.
a bit more than previously. But academia just doesn't feel like the niche for you because you seem like you'd be good at it because you're not quite linear in your
Yeah.
background and you've got the applied portion. So
I don't want to exclude it from the list of options, but I think there may be a period of time in between jumping into academia if I go that route. Like you said, the change from your undergrad prepares you well for masters, and then your masters is just a completely different beast than your PhD. And even staying
hmm
with Brad on the same project at the same university, you'd think it'd be identical, and it's not. It's a whole different bag of worms, and there's a lot more to it. And it's not that I dislike academia. There's things that I like about it a lot, and there's things that I don't like about it a lot. The stress of like writing grants and finding money and kind of doing that, for some people that's like what they cling to. They love coming up with an idea, writing a grant, bringing on collaborators, getting that funding, and then seeing the results and the fruition of their hard work. And for me, that's just like anxiety, So,
Oh, I hate all of it.
okay, good.
I didn't
I'm glad
I
you.
didn't even, like nothing in my career, actually, I just kept following leads
Yeah.
and ended up where I'm at. And, for people's understanding too, like once you have your PhD, you're not done being tested,
Mm-mm.
right? The way you get tenure it's pretty stressful. I physically made myself ill, in the tenure process. I mean, it is a lot of work. And so you're tested by your peers as to whether you get tenure or not. And if you don't get tenure, you might as well just move on to another university, right? It's like, you didn't pass,
Yeah.
right? And I was like 45 years old. And imagine still being tested till you're 40. Now I still have full professor to get,
Yeah.
if I want to, right, at associate. So until you get full professor, you're basically being tested. And so this is people that are sometimes 50 years plus
Yeah.
that finally get full professor. And yeah, it's I don't know. I just kept chasing it, and mostly it's enjoying working with students and new projects and people across the country. And I don't feel like if I went and worked for any other entity that large scope of work or capacity to work with different people and across different disciplines would be there.
Yeah.
But I tell you, I'm an academic that doesn't consider himself an academician in the least. Like
Yeah.
I I just could put my head down, do good work, and go home and do the same thing when I wake up the next day again. So,
Yeah.
and you'd be surprised how many of us are out there like that. There are people who are linear that went straight through and then went right from their PhD to a postdoc to, work for a university.
Yeah.
But yeah, your comment of at least go out and work as for one of those agencies or nonprofit or whatever before going back to teaching. I've always, when I've met those folks, I feel like they've got a really good grasp on the field to a
Yeah.
greater degree. So, good for you for being forward thinking, I think, like that as well. So
Yeah, I'm just trying to get experience and meet folks and really it's those the opportunities that just happenstance come your way. Sometimes you just ride in a tidal wave and you have to take an opportunity where it comes. And I think
yep,
that's
yep.
a big thing for any of the younger folks coming into the field. It's like you cannot say no to opportunities, just because you're worried or cautious or something. Like jump on it. You don't know where it's going to end up taking you, and it's always going to be good. I should say
Well,
most.
you tend not to regret the things you did. You regret
Yeah,
the things you didn't do,
100%.
right? So undergrads, at least, I'm like, just apply for 20 jobs, like technician
Mhm.
jobs.
Yep.
And whoever calls you first and offers you a job, like apply to 20 of them that you would take.
Yeah.
And unless there's major red flags in the interview process, after you interview and they call you and offer you the job, don't be like, oh, I'm going to hold out for this other Eagle thing in Alaska. Be like, just take the damn job,
Yeah.
and just do that for like, I always say like 8 months, like take anywhere from 2 to 6 months jobs for 6 months to 2 years before going back and getting a master's.
Yep.
Don't go beyond 2 years because
Yeah.
it gets tough. I have a
Yes.
very, very good graduate student that worked 4 years for Wisconsin DNR that's working with us right now. But I also gave her like a semester with not many classes and just like easing back into, she's like, what should I do? What should I do? And I'm like, you just need to learn how to be a student again.
Yeah. Yeah, you get completely disconnected. And I was a year and a half post undergrad into getting into a master's position, and I worked for the DNR as as that general wildlife assistant, and I also worked in the winters on a deer project, collaring white-tailed deer and stuff, and just getting the experience from multiple different avenues of research and management, and just really
Mhm.
trying to figure out what you want to do. I volunteered with Wildlife Services for a while, APHIS, getting to see all of the different aspects of what management looks like and what research looks like was incredibly valuable. And I want everybody to try to do that because
Yeah.
there's so many people who are, like you said, very linear, and they knew what they wanted from the get-go, and they didn't get some of these external inputs. And I think it's a disservice a lot of
Well, and
times.
then they have to work with those folks because that's where their
Mhm.
funding's coming from, or those are their collaborators and partners, and you need to
Mhm.
understand who they are and where they're coming from first. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Hey, a little thinker here, maybe to end before we do a sign off with you. This has been fantastic. I really Appreciate your time. Appreciate you as a researcher. Appreciate everything you're doing for Mid-South ducks. But the State of the Birds document came out recently, and it shows waterfowl doing, much better in general. It differs across species, of course, than others. Yeah. So, talk about maybe the passionate duck hunters, waterfowl biologists, why you think that waterfowl are doing better, and then maybe how we can do better for the other birds too, right? The forest birds, the shore birds, the aerial insectivores, right? That's one. So like your swallows and things that eat mosquitoes around your barn and such, the flycatchers like phoebes and things. Yeah. That I wouldn't say they control insects, but they can't hurt.
Right.
But they've been taking it on the chin, basically. Yeah. So kind of long-winded though, like, how did we do so well with waterfowl? And then how can we, or should we help folks translate that to other birds?
Yeah. No, I think a lot about this, and I really think it's a values issue, and not an issue. I don't want to call it an issue, but we see waterfowl as having this intrinsic value because they're this migratory game bird that we've been able to pursue, and there's a lot of passion, and with that passion comes funding, and we've been able to do a lot of research. The mallard is just the most studied bird ever, right? So, yeah. and here I am studying him still. So. I think there's a lot of value in us having these long-term data sets and very in-depth research and subsequently conservation efforts in our waterfowl, and we see a lot of really good benefits from it. But kind of showing the intrinsic values of all of our other bird species and the biodiversity as a whole, and kind of seeing some of the red flags. We're seeing aerial insectivores crashing. And that a lot of times is going to coincide with our insect populations crashing. How many times in the summer do we drive down the road and our windshields aren't as covered in bugs anymore? It's like, that should be a red flag. The bugs are a good thing. Birds are a good thing. And as we lose the biodiversity across, all of our landscapes and all of our ecosystems, that's really going to spell, issues for us as a population and as a whole. And I think that kind of trying to push more education, understanding, outreach, that's been one of my favorite parts of doing research is the actual outreach portion of it, going out and talking to people about what we're doing and getting that information out there. And I think that if we can do more outreach and tie in, the umbrella species that aren't ducks but are impacted by ducks, thinking about forest birds and boreal forest nesting for our waterfowl. If we can conserve boreal forests and grasslands, everything is going to benefit beyond that, and same with wetlands. So trying to kind of lump these birds as indicators in under waterfowl management, I think is something we need to strive more towards. I know there's efforts for it too, but outreach and tying in that human dimension is, I think, one of the most important things we can do to keep going.
I think the waterfowl community, if you look at this summer, the discussion and debate that is alive and well around waterfowl stuff, and I do not agree with everybody out there, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But that is what's driving us, right? That passion for that resource. One of the things I always link in with it is like, if we have healthy waterfowl populations, healthy landscapes for waterfowl to live, we probably have healthy places for people to live too.
Yep.
Right. There may be some economic trade-off there, but where I get, so I'm talking like game species, and I say versus non-game species, and I think that still exists. And some people say that concept should go away, but the sandbox, meaning the money, is only so big.
Yep.
And I really think, and this is a very hard-handed statement, that the folks that are playing in our sandbox need to either find their own sandbox but they need to find their own sandbox and play with their own toys, because I feel like we have been horribly watered down with trying to save every species everywhere all the time with the same or less money.
Yeah.
And my comment always to the folks that work in the non-game bird world is step up and figure it out. Yeah. Like, find the earmarked money. In an age where we are devaluing, I think, the environment and putting less financial resources into it, we probably need to be doing more of that. And I don't know how to do it, but we got Duck Stamp, we got PR. and other dedicated funding that's out there, nonprofit organizations like Delta and DU that generate a ton of philanthropic money for ducks. My comment to the folks for your forest birds and other stuff is I don't know, go figure it out, because it's gotten a little old for me over the years. It sounds like a harsh statement, but I kind of leave that to the students that are up and coming too. And you're going to work with a lot of across a diversity of folks like I have, but I think that we've really got to find a better way to have more resources, because we're trying to do more with less and it's not working. It's genuinely not working.
Yeah. The reducing pot is detrimental to all, for sure. And there needs to be, I think we just gotta have to be more creative as a whole of where our funding's coming from and how we look at it. And whether it's a NASA grant to preserve a warbler, I don't know, but we have to be creative in how we're getting these funds and try to, like you said, do better.
Hey, I think it's got to come in the short term from philanthropy. Honestly, there's folks out there with deep pockets and deeper than they've ever been.
Yep.
And I think if they're passionate about these things, about waterfowl, about birds, and about the environment, that they probably need to step up. And I think a lot of them are, but I think it could be better for sure. Put your money where your wallet is, or your money where your mouth is, or something like that.
And it comes back to proving the value. Like we just have to prove that it's worth spending philanthropic dollars on. Like, this is going to benefit you if you spend money on it, because everybody is kind of self-fulfilling in some way, shape, or form. So
For sure. Well, and that's where the waterfowl money's always come, because people think if they open their wallets, they've got more ducks, which has been the case. I mean, that's why ducks are doing that much better overall, right? 100%. So, hey, I didn't mean to get you into some deep well there at the end, Cory, but I appreciate how you handled it. I felt like you were in like a master's defense question at least there for a second. So.
No, I like it. I've got comps coming up here for too long, so I need to start getting hard questions asked.
Good stuff. Yeah, those can be stressy. That basically allows you to be then not just a student but a candidate for your doctoral degree. So, how does yours work? Like ours is like we do written, so it's like 4 people's questions and you have like 1 day to answer them.
Yep.
And then there's like a 2-hour follow-up kind of oral defense where the committee asks you questions, and then we decide whether you passed or failed at your knowledge. Is that kind of similar to what y'all do? Yeah,
I've currently got 6 committee members, and
that's huge.
I know we're going to talk about it a little more, but I may be doing a 1 day for each committee member and for writtens, and that'll be a lot if that's the case. But
that's a lot, yeah.
Then we do an oral afterwards, and that's just like expanding on your written questions and kind of doing that dig in deeper to what you understand and the ideas that you're the master's was interesting. It's where you master science, right? And so it's really knowledge based, but then your PhD is philosophy, so it's bigger understanding of concepts and how the world works together and kind of extrapolating on that stuff. So I don't think I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it being over. But
well, you said it, I think, really well. I think master's students are practitioners that are well trained, that have mastered a field, right? That we can put out there and be sure that they'll be able to do that work. But PhD, once someone gets that in this field, it's more of an ethical responsibility at that point. You're expected to be a leader among people in your field. And that's a heavy weight. And that's what I've always said, is that the master's degree step from the master's to the PhD is a completely different beast, because one is about being good at what you do, and the other is about being responsible for your field.
Yeah.
And so I'll leave you with that. It's a heavy weight when you get done. Anybody out there with a PhD that doesn't feel an ethical responsibility to wake up every day and do your best work, well, maybe you should have stayed at the master's level.
Yeah,
I don't think there's many out there.
No.
And the folks I work with are awesome, just absolutely awesome. So, well, good luck with it all, Cory, and thank you so much for being a guest on the Young Waterfowl Professional Series and providing the advice to that, I've always said this. I don't think you have to be in the old ranks like me to give sage advice. So I think you did a great job with it all, and
Thank you.
really appreciate you again and everything you're doing for the ducks and duck hunters across Duck Country, USA. So
Sweet.
appreciate
Thanks.
you.
I was happy to be here. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.